Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So Gilberto Ramirez defeats Billam Smith to become the unified Cruiserweight World Champion. He adds the WBO title to his existing WBA title. And of course he actually becomes the two-weight world champion, having started at 168 pounds, former super middleweight champion. But this was a very good performance by Gilberto Ramirez, and his superior skill shone through in this fight. You know, I think now we're finally seeing Gilberto Ramirez realise his talent. If you followed this channel for any length of time, you would know I've personally rated Ramirez for a long time. But even myself, I was becoming frustrated with Ramirez at 168, at 175. I don't think he was stepping through the levels. I don't think he was taking the fights or getting the fights that he should have had. And I got a little bored of Ramirez, I have to say. But since he's moved to Cruiserweight, I think now we are seeing this guy's talent. Because when I've said about this guy's talent in the past, many people just said, well, at 68 and 75, he was just relying on size. He had nothing else. Well, we saw against Goulamarian and now against Billam Smith that, you know, he's got the skills to beat these bigger, more physical guys at Cruiserweight and do it well. Not only that, he does hold his own quite well at Cruiserweight physically. You know, in the clinch with Billam Smith tonight, aside from like the first couple of rounds where Zerdo looked a little uncomfortable, he dealt with Billam Smith up close in the clinch. You know, times he was pushing him back, pushing him off. He was working on the inside, getting good head position, he was spinning out when he had to, and he was really taking apart Billam Smith, who tried to utilise his physicality. Billam Smith tried to utilise his strength, you know, being the more natural cruiserweight. And early on, you know, Billam Smith had success in the first couple of rounds. First round in particular, he split the guard of Ramirez a couple of times with his right hand, and it looked like Ramirez felt those shots. So I wondered at that time, is my prediction going to be wrong? Is the physicality of Billam Smith going to overcome Ramirez? But after like the first round or two, Ramirez totally took over with his skill and his boxing ability out of that southpaw stance. The footwork of Ramirez in this fight was night and day compared to Billam Smith, who was very flat-footed. You know, Billam Smith's never been the most fleet-of-footed guys. And he paid for it tonight against a guy in Ramirez who was able to step around, who was able to spin Billam Smith, you know, changing the angles of his attack. Not only would he change the angles with his feet, but also his hands. Sometimes he'd lead with the, obviously the lead right jab out of a southpaw stance, followed by a right hook. Sometimes he'd lead off with his left hand, Ramirez was going from body to head with both hands, showing a lot of variety in his work and how he set his work up. He was countering Billam Smith. He was punching with Billam Smith, especially in the first half of this fight when Billam Smith was swinging. Ramirez would counter him with his overhand left and the right hook, punching with Smith very effectively. And through the mid-rounds, I'll be honest, I felt it looked like Billam Smith was going to walk into a big shot because he was getting tagged with counters from Ramirez. So yeah, as this fight was playing out, it was getting harder and harder for Billam Smith. Billam Smith had moments, you know, working the body, cuffing shots around the side. We know how Billam Smith fights. He had some bursts where he would get some shots through, but his work wasn't consistent, whereas Ramirez's was. He was always jabbing. He was always stepping around the target. He was constantly throwing combinations. He was constantly countering. He was constantly changing levels with his work. High output, high octane, landing the more eye-catching shots. He was just more consistent throughout Ramirez, and the skills were on a different level. There was a moment in round 10, I think it was, where Billam Smith landed an uppercut to the body, and it looked like Ramirez felt it. But, you know, the commentary pointed it out where, you know, they felt that Ramirez was hurt, but I wasn't convinced he was, because right after that, he rocks Billam Smith's head back with like 3 consecutive straight left hands. It was almost like he was playing possum, you know, like he was trying to set some bait for Billam Smith. But yeah, like Billam Smith tried to end this fight. on his shield. He tried to go for the knockout. Felt he gave it a really good go towards the end. He gave it a really good go throughout because his face was a mess. Swollen eye, cut on the eyelid. But Billam Smith kept on going. Again, had little bits of success here and there. Really tried in the championship rounds. Round 12 in particular was a great round by both guys. One thing I got to say again about Ramirez, he could have coasted the last sort of 3 rounds. He could have coasted the championship rounds, but he stayed to fight. And round 12 was a slobber knocker. Both guys had some great success. Both guys head-to-head, trading, going for knockouts. Ramirez going for a knockout because it would be the icing on the cake. Billam Smith going for a knockout because he needed a knockout. And both guys went for it in round 12, man. Both guys landed some great shots. But even then, man, I felt that Ramirez, in those exchanges, held his shape better. I felt he landed the better punches, and I felt he won round 12. I gave Billam Smith maybe 2 rounds, 3 rounds at max, 3 rounds max. Very good display by Gilberto Ramirez, and for me, we are now finally seeing the best of this man, because again, I've always rated this guy's talent. I think he's one of those fighters who can do a bit of everything. He can fight on the inside, he can box from range, he can counter punch, he can trade, he can take a punch, he can punch. He's good. He's got decent feet. He's a very good fighter, Ramirez, and I think he showed that tonight. Really good display. He becomes the unified cruiserweight champion. And listen, man, we want to see a unification fight with Jaya Pattaya. That's what I want to see. That fight to me is a lot more interesting now. A lot more interesting. Hopefully we get that next. As for Billam Smith, man, he's overachieved. Been a world champion. Defended it a couple of times. Given his style, is it time to call it a day? Possibly. He took a lot of shots tonight. He's taken a lot of shots throughout his career. But, he just lost against a very good fighter. So, listen, he can come back if he wants to, but is there any point? Is he gonna climb the mountain again? I don't think so, personally. But anyway, share your thoughts below. Been your guy, Del Boy. Peace.